Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information presented in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. The discussion of legal processes, divorce proceedings, and psychological health within the context of American independent film does not constitute professional legal, financial, or mental health advice. Every situation is unique, and laws vary significantly by jurisdiction. You should always consult with a qualified professional in your area before making any decisions related to divorce, custody, or financial settlements. We encourage all viewers to conduct their own due diligence. Most men enter a divorce thinking they are in a legal battle, only to realize too late that they are actually in a psychological thriller where they aren't the protagonist. In American independent film, we see the blueprint of this collapse. Not the sanitized, high-budget Hollywood version where everything is resolved with a grand gesture and a 90-minute runtime, but the raw, unedited, and often brutal reality of what happens when a man's identity is stripped down to a docket number. Consider the historical trends. For decades, cinema portrayed the divorced man as either the predatory bachelor or the bumbling, incompetent father. But a new wave of independent cinema has begun to document a more terrifying reality: the systematic erosion of a man's social, financial, and emotional architecture. If you are a man watching this today, you aren't just looking for a way out. You are looking for a way to survive the reconstruction of your entire world. This deep dive masterclass is designed to solve the most pressing problem facing men in the modern West today: the lack of a realistic roadmap for the transition from husband to individual. We are going to use the lens of American independent film to deconstruct the divorce machine, identifying the traps that real men fall into by analyzing the case studies of characters who lost everything, and a few who managed to save their souls. By the end of this 10-part series, you will understand the psychological maneuvers, the legal pitfalls, and the social isolation that independent directors have been trying to warn us about for years. This is not about winning. It is about the potential outcomes of maintaining your dignity in a system that often feels designed to strip it away. To understand where we are, we must look at the historical trends of masculine portrayal in cinema. Traditionally, mainstream films focused on the event of divorce, the shouting matches, the dramatic courtroom exits. Independent film, however, focuses on the aftermath, the quiet, hollowed-out silence of an empty apartment. Think of the 2005 film The Squid and the Whale. It serves as a stark case study in how intellectual ego can blind a man to his own domestic displacement. When we analyze the character of Bernard Berkman, we see a man who defines himself entirely by his status as a writer and a father, yet fails to see that his rigid adherence to his own perceived greatness is exactly what accelerates his isolation. This film highlights a critical step-by-step detail in the divorce process. The transition from we to I often involves a period of intense delusion. Bernard tries to maintain the same hierarchy in his life even as the floor is being pulled out from under him. For men in the real world, this mirrors the trap of trying to maintain a lifestyle or a domestic authority that no longer exists, leading to potential outcomes of financial ruin and alienated children. The divorce machine is a term often used in independent cinema to describe the bureaucratic transition from a romantic relationship to a clerical one. In the 2019 film Marriage Story, we see a granular step-by-step breakdown of how a seemingly amicable separation is weaponized by the legal system. The character of Charlie, played by Adam Driver, represents a historical trend in American men: the belief that we don't need lawyers, we can just talk it out. The film painstakingly shows how this mindset is a strategic disadvantage. Once the paperwork is filed, the language of the relationship changes from love and partnership to assets and custody. Independent cinema excels at showing the visceral reaction to this shift. When Charlie realizes that his wife has hired a high-powered attorney, we see the immediate physical manifestation of his anxiety. This is a crucial lesson for our audience. The potential outcomes of a divorce are often decided in the first 30 days, yet most men spend those 30 days in a state of shock or denial, as seen in cinematic case studies across the last 20 years. We must also address the identity vacuum. In many independent films such as Manchester by the Sea, we see the portrayal of a man who is not just divorced from a spouse, but divorced from society itself. While the film deals with a more extreme form of grief, the depiction of Lee Chandler's isolation is a perfect metaphor for the post-divorce male experience. Data suggests that men often rely on their wives for their entire social calendar and emotional support network. When that link is severed, the man often finds himself in a vacuum, where he has no one to talk to and no purpose outside of his job. Independent films use claustrophobic framing and cold color palettes to visualize this. For the viewer today, the takeaway is clear. The reconstruction of a social circle is not a luxury. It is a survival requirement. We see this in the step-by-step descent of characters who fail to build a tribe post-separation. They become ghosts in their own lives, much like the thematic elements found in a ghost story. Furthermore, let's analyze the financial erosion depicted in these films. Independent cinema doesn't shy away from the gritty details of the two-household problem. Historical trends show that after a divorce, a man's standard of living can fluctuate wildly based on how he manages the immediate shock phase. In films like Blue Valentine, the focus is on the slow, agonizing burn of a marriage ending, but the subtext is always about the resources being drained: time, money, and emotional energy. The film serves as a case study in sunk cost fallacy. Many men stay in a destructive situation or fight unnecessary legal battles because they feel they have invested too much to let go. Independent cinema teaches us that the most successful potential outcomes occur when a man realizes that his future self is more important than his past investment. This involves a step-by-step detachment from the material symbols of the marriage, the house, the car, the perfect family image, in favor of long-term stability. In this masterclass, we are also going to look at the fatherhood pivot. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching aspect of American independent film is the depiction of the visitation father. Films like Kramer vs. Kramer, which, while a studio film, pioneered the indie-style domestic realism, and more modern iterations show the man struggling to create a home in a space that feels like a hotel room. We will examine the step-by-step process of how to move from visiting your children to parenting your children in a new environment. The cinematic evidence suggests that men who attempt to recreate their old home in their new apartment often fail, whereas those who build a new, distinct culture for their children find more sustainable success. The promise of this series is to take these cinematic warnings and turn them into actionable insights. We aren't just watching movies. We are analyzing a cultural mirror that shows us where the pitfalls are hidden. We will look at the data of male suicide rates post-divorce, the historical trends of custody arrangements in the U.S. court system, and the psychological case studies of resilient versus broken men. We are moving beyond the surface-level advice of just move on, and into a deep, uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating exploration of what it means to be a man in the wake of a collapsed union. This is part one of your journey. We have identified the machine, we have seen the identity vacuum, and we have acknowledged the legal shift. Now we prepare for the deep dive into the specific strategies of survival that independent cinema has been whispering to us for decades. Stay focused, because the next 9 parts will determine whether you become a tragic character in someone else's story or the director of your own new life. To move forward, we must first address the immediate wreckage of the first 48 hours, a period that American independent film often depicts with agonizing precision. In cinema, this is the moment the score drops out and the protagonist is left in a room that suddenly feels twice its original size. Imagine if you are John, a 35-year-old project manager in Denver, Colorado, in this year of 2026. You have just had the conversation that changes everything. Your first instinct, much like the characters we see in films like Blue Valentine, might be to fight for the past. You want to argue, to negotiate, and to find the logic in a situation that is inherently emotional. However, looking at historical trends in male behavioral responses during separation, this initial desire to fix the unfixable often leads to the first major tactical error: overcommunication. In the 2010 film Blue Valentine, the character of Dean, played by Ryan Gosling, showcases a case study in the destructive power of desperate persistence. Dean believes that if he can just recreate the magic of their early days, the current decay will vanish. He forces a romantic getaway that turns into a psychological battlefield. For men in 2026, the digital equivalent of this is the long-form text message or the late-night email. Historical trends suggest that these digital footprints are rarely helpful and often become exhibits in future litigation. The lesson from independent cinema is that silence is not just a stylistic choice. It is a defensive necessity. When the dialogue stops working, any further words only serve to provide more ammunition for the opposing narrative. Step by step, the first move for a man in John's position should be the implementation of a communication blackout on non-essential topics. This doesn't mean ignoring legal or co-parenting obligations, but it does mean ending the cycle of emotional begging that Dean exemplifies. We then transition to the concept of the neutral zone. In many independent films, the male protagonist is shown moving into a transitional space, a motel, a friend's couch, or a sparsely furnished studio apartment. We see this in the visual language of films like The 5-Year Engagement or even the more somber Manchester by the Sea. The room becomes a character itself, representing the man's internal state. Imagine if John moves into a temporary rental in downtown Denver. The mistake many men make, which is reflected in case studies of high-conflict divorces, is treating this space as a temporary purgatory rather than a foundation. Historical trends indicate that men who fail to establish a clean, functional, and organized living space early on are at a higher risk for long-term depressive episodes. The step-by-step detail here involves reclaiming your environment. This means not living out of a suitcase and not surrounding yourself with relics of the previous life. Independent cinema shows us that the man who stares at the old wedding photo in a dark room is the man who remains stuck in the first act. The man who clears the desk and buys a single, high-quality frying pan is the man who is preparing for the second act. Now, let us examine the legal pivot through the lens of the 2019 film Marriage Story. This film is perhaps the most accurate case study of the escalation of conflict in the modern American system. Charlie, the protagonist, begins the film with the belief that he can handle the separation with a simple handshake. He ignores the historical trends that show how mediation can quickly turn into litigation once external influencers, lawyers, family members, or new partners enter the fray. In 2026, the legal landscape for men has evolved, but the fundamental trap remains the same: the belief that the person you are divorcing is the same person you married. Marriage Story illustrates that under the pressure of the legal machine, people become versions of themselves they never thought possible. Charlie's lack of preparation is his undoing. He finds himself playing catch-up in a jurisdiction he doesn't live in, with a budget he hasn't planned for. For John in 2026, the step-by-step detail for the legal pivot starts with an objective assessment of assets and liabilities. This isn't about greed, it is about clarity. You must look at the digital infrastructure of your life: shared cloud storage, streaming accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and even social media handles. Historical trends show that digital assets are becoming a primary point of contention in 2026 divorces. If John has a shared family account where all his work documents are stored, he is at risk of losing access or having his privacy compromised. The independent film version of this would be the character realizing his ex-spouse has been reading his private journals or emails. To avoid this potential outcome, the man must conduct a digital audit, changing passwords and securing personal data before the legal battle intensifies. This is about creating boundaries, not hiding assets, which is a critical distinction that must be maintained to follow legal protocols. Another vital element explored in independent cinema is the fatherhood facade. We see this in films like The Squid and the Whale, where the father, Bernard, uses his children as pawns in his intellectual games. He tries to win their loyalty by being the cool, or enlightened parent, while simultaneously denigrating the mother. This case study shows the potential outcomes of such behavior: the total alienation of the children once they grow old enough to see through the manipulation. In 2026, with the rise of social media and the constant documentation of life, the temptation for men to perform their fatherhood for the camera is at an all-time high. Imagine if John starts posting frequent, staged photos of him and his kids to prove he is a great dad. This performance often masks a lack of genuine connection and can be interpreted by courts as posturing. The cinematic lesson here is that true fatherhood in the wake of divorce is found in the quiet, unfilmed moments: the homework help, the consistent bedtime, and the refusal to speak ill of the other parent. Historical trends show that children who thrive post-divorce are those whose fathers prioritize stability over performance. We must also discuss the indie hermit trap. In many films, the divorced man retreats into a shell of hobbies or work, avoiding the outside world entirely. While this can provide a temporary shield, the long-term potential outcomes are social atrophy and the loss of a support network. Case studies of men who have successfully navigated this transition show a common thread: they force themselves into new social environments. In 2026, this might mean joining a local hiking group, a jiu-jitsu gym, or a professional networking association that has nothing to do with their former life. The goal is to build an identity that is not tethered to the role of husband. In the films, we often see a breakthrough moment where the protagonist finally leaves his apartment and engages with a stranger, signifying the beginning of his recovery. For John, this means scheduling at least 3 social interactions a week that are strictly for his own personal growth. As we look toward the financial reconstruction that awaits, we have to acknowledge that the first moves are often the most expensive. Not just in terms of legal fees but in terms of the cost of mistakes made in haste. Independent cinema frequently shows the man selling his most prized possessions at a loss, or making impulsive purchases to fill the void. Historical trends suggest that the first year post-separation is the most financially volatile for men. This brings us to a critical realization that most men overlook until it is too late. You might think you are fighting for the house or the car, but what you are actually fighting for is your time. In the world of independent film, time is the most precious resource, often depicted through long, lingering shots of the protagonist doing nothing. But in your life, time is what allows you to rebuild your career, your health, and your relationship with your children. But how do you protect that time when the legal system is designed to consume it? How do you ensure that your financial foundation isn't pulverized before you even get a chance to start over? In the next part, we are going to dive into the specifics of the financial fortress. We will analyze the cinematic depictions of the broke but free trope and why it is a dangerous myth for the modern man. We will look at how to navigate the 2026 tax implications of asset division, and why your choice of representation could be the difference between a new beginning and a decade of debt. The machine is already in motion. It is time to learn how to build your own. Building that machine begins with deconstructing the most dangerous myth in American independent film: the romanticized version of the broke but free man. In cinema, we often see the protagonist walking away from a shattered marriage with nothing but a leather jacket and a vintage car, heading toward a sunset of self-discovery. Think of the stylistic choices in films like The Puffy Chair or Beginners. There is an aesthetic beauty to the empty apartment and the lack of clutter. However, in the reality of 2026, this cinematic trope is a psychological trap. Historical trends indicate that men who adopt the broke but free mindset during the initial stages of asset division often find themselves in a decade-long cycle of financial stagnation. They trade their long-term security for short-term emotional relief, calling it peace of mind when in fact, it is a strategic retreat that the legal system will rarely allow them to reverse. Imagine if you are Mark, a 42-year-old software architect living in Austin, Texas, in 2026. Your career has been the primary engine of your family's wealth for 15 years. As the divorce begins, the emotional weight is so heavy that you tell your lawyer you just want it to be over. You consider letting your spouse keep the equity in the Westlake home and the majority of the liquid savings just to stop the fighting. This is what we call the nice guy tax. Case studies of men in high-earning brackets show that this impulsive generosity is often interpreted by the court not as a sign of goodwill, but as a baseline for future support. If you start by giving away 70% of your foundation to prove you are a good man, the system often assumes you can easily generate that same wealth again under the same conditions. But the conditions have changed. You are no longer part of a dual-income efficiency household. You are now an individual with a separate rent payment, separate utility bills, and a significantly higher tax burden. In 2026, the financial landscape has shifted dramatically due to the sunsetting of key provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. For men like Mark, this means that the standard deduction has dropped and individual tax rates have climbed back up. When you are looking at asset division, you cannot look at the gross numbers. You must look at the post-tax reality. Independent cinema rarely shows the protagonist sitting down with a spreadsheet to calculate the capital gains tax on a property sale or the long-term implications of a QDRO, which is a Qualified Domestic Relations Order. A QDRO is the legal instrument used to divide retirement benefits, such as a 401k or a pension. Historical trends show that men often overlook the hidden costs of these transfers. If you give up $100,000 in a liquid savings account to keep $100,000 in a 401k, you have lost money. The savings account is post-tax cash. The 401k is a future tax liability. You are trading a dollar for 65 cents, depending on your 2026 tax bracket. Step by step, the construction of your financial fortress begins with a forensic audit of your own life. This isn't just about bank statements. It is about what independent films call the mise en scene, the objects that tell the story of your life. In a film, a character might lose their record collection or their favorite chair. In your life, it is about the intellectual property you have created, the stock options that haven't invested yet, and the frequent flyer miles that represent thousands of dollars in future travel. Data from 2026 indicates that digital assets, including cryptocurrency and non-fungible tokens, are now standard entries in divorce disclosures. Even if your independent film soul wants to leave the material world behind, your 2026 reality requires you to account for every Satoshi and every unvested share. Potential outcomes for men who hide these assets are catastrophic, often leading to charges of fraud or a total loss of credibility in front of a judge. Conversely, men who are transparent but firm about the valuation of these assets tend to reach more equitable settlements. Let us return to the case study of legal representation found in Marriage Story. The film presents three distinct models of representation through the characters of Nora, Jay, and Bert. Nora is the shark who weaponizes empathy. Jay is the blunt force instrument who views the process as a zero-sum game. And Bert is the empathetic guide who wants to keep things civil. For a man in 2026, choosing between these archetypes is the most consequential decision of the first 90 days. Historical trends suggest that many men initially choose a Bert, the nice, elderly lawyer who reminds them of a grandfather, because they want to believe the process will be fair. However, when the other side hires a Nora, the Bert model often collapses. The lesson from independent cinema is that you do not choose a lawyer based on who you are. You choose a lawyer based on the reality of the situation you are in. If you are in a high-conflict scenario where your access to your children is being used as a bargaining chip, hiring a Bert can lead to potential outcomes where you lose precious time that you can never get back. Step by step, you must vet your representation by asking for their historical trends in your specific jurisdiction. How many of their cases go to trial? What is their relationship with the local judges? In 2026, legal technology has advanced to the point where attorneys use data analytics to predict how certain judges will rule on alimony or custody. If your lawyer isn't using these tools, they are fighting with 1990s weapons in a 2026 war. You need a representative who understands that this is a business transaction designed to protect your ability to be a father and a productive member of society. Furthermore, we must address the house trap. In American independent film, the family home is often a symbol of lost innocence, usually shown in a montage of better times. In reality, the house is often an illiquid albatross. Many men fight to keep the house to provide stability for the children, but historical trends show that the cost of maintaining a family-sized home on a single income is one of the leading causes of post-divorce bankruptcy. Imagine if Mark keeps the Austin home but has to spend 50% of his take-home pay on the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. He is house poor. He cannot afford to take his kids on vacations, he cannot afford to invest in his own health, and he is one roof leak away from a financial crisis. The independent film move is often to let the house go. It is a cinematic shedding of the skin. By selling the home and splitting the equity, you create a liquid buffer that allows you to navigate the volatility of the next 2 years. This brings us to the concept of the lifestyle reset. In 2026, the most successful men are those who treat their divorce as a corporate restructuring. You are the CEO of your own life, and your former partnership is a subsidiary that is being liquidated. You must cut the burn rate immediately. This means auditing every subscription, every club membership, and every recurring expense that was part of the we identity. The character of Bernard in The Squid and the Whale failed because he tried to maintain his elite, intellectual lifestyle while his actual resources were dwindling. He became a caricature of his former self. To avoid this, you must embrace the minimalism of the indie aesthetic, not as a permanent state of poverty, but as a temporary strategic lean period. But even with a financial fortress, there is a rot that can settle in from the inside. You can have the best lawyer in Austin, a perfect QDRO, and a balanced spreadsheet, but if your mind is still living in the third act of a tragedy, the fortress will crumble. Many men spend so much time focusing on the numbers that they ignore the psychological warfare waged on their own sense of worth. In the next part, we are going to explore the psychological pivot. We will look at the cinematic depictions of the breaking point, and how independent film captures the precise moment a man loses his grip on reality. We will analyze the data on male isolation and why the most dangerous person in your divorce might actually be the man looking back at you in the mirror. The legal battle is fought in the courtroom, but the survival battle is fought in the quiet hours of the night. It is time to talk about the silence. The silence of a post-divorce home is not just the absence of sound. It is a heavy, physical presence that American independent film captures better than any other medium. In mainstream cinema, silence is a transition, a moment of reflection before the hero finds his resolve. But in independent cinema, silence is the antagonist. It is the cold, blue-hued reality of a character standing in a kitchen at 3 in the morning, wondering how the trajectory of their life could have shifted so violently. This is the psychological pivot. It is the moment you realize that while the lawyers are fighting over the house in 2026, The real battle is being fought within the confines of your own mind. If you do not master this silence, it will master you. Historical trends in male psychology suggest that men often experience a delayed emotional reaction to divorce. While the initial phase is dominated by the logistics of the financial fortress, the second phase, the internal collapse, often arrives exactly when the legal dust begins to settle. Imagine if you are David, a 48-year-old middle manager in Seattle, Washington, in this year of 2026. The decree was signed 3 weeks ago. You have the apartment, you have the visitation schedule, and you have the spreadsheets we discussed in the previous parts. But as you sit in that apartment, the silence begins to speak. It tells you that you are a failure. It tells you that your best years are behind you. This is the echo chamber that independent film directors like Kenneth Lonergan or Noah Baumbach explore with surgical precision. In Manchester by the Sea, the character of Lee Chandler is a walking case study in what happens when a man allows the silence to become his permanent residence. He is not just sad. He is psychologically frozen. He has created a lifestyle of self-punishment because he cannot find the pivot point to move from his past tragedy into a functional present. For men in 2026, the potential outcomes of entering this frozen state include chronic isolation, a decline in professional performance, and a total loss of the self-worth required to be an effective father. To avoid the Lee Chandler trap, we must analyze the step-by-step detail of the psychological protocol. The first step is the recognition of the cinematic narrative. Most men view their divorce as a tragedy because that is the genre they have been assigned. But independent film shows us that the most resilient characters are those who recognize they are in a coming-of-age story, regardless of their age. Step 1 involves auditing your internal monologue. Are you narrating your life as a victim of the system or as an architect of a new foundation? Data from 2026 indicates that men who utilize cognitive behavioral techniques to reframe their divorce as a transition rather than an ending show significantly higher rates of long-term emotional stability. This is not about forced positivity. It is about the historical trends of human resilience. The second step in the protocol is the regulation of the sensory environment. Independent films use color and sound to dictate the mood of a character. If your apartment in Seattle is filled with mismatched furniture, old boxes, and bad lighting, you are effectively scoring your own life as a depressing indie drama. Case studies of men who have successfully pivoted show that the physical environment acts as a mirror for the internal state. In the film Everything Must Go, Will Ferrell's character lives on his front lawn. It is a public manifestation of his internal chaos. The step-by-step detail for David in 2026 is to aggressively curate his living space. This means lighting that mimics natural sun, removing any items that trigger negative nostalgia, and creating a space that is designed for the person he is becoming, not the person he used to be. This is a functional requirement for psychological health. The third step is the social friction requirement. Independent film often portrays the protagonist in a state of total solitude, but this is a stylistic choice, not a survival strategy. In the real world of 2026, isolation is a high-risk factor. Historical trends suggest that men who lose their primary partner also lose 80% of their social support network, as many friendships are tied to the couple dynamic. The pivot requires you to intentionally create social friction, small, frequent interactions that force you out of your internal monologue. This isn't about finding a new partner. It is about finding a tribe. Whether it is a local run club, a woodworking class, or a professional mastermind, the goal is to re-engage with the world as an individual. We see the potential outcomes of this in films where the character finally accepts an invitation to dinner or joins a community project. That is the moment the color returns to the film. Furthermore, we must address the concept of the breaking point. Every independent film has one. It is the moment the protagonist finally cracks. In 2026, for a man like David, this might look like a sudden emotional outburst at work or a late-night social media post that he immediately regrets. Historical trends show that men often suppress their emotions until they reach a point of critical mass. Educational case studies suggest that the most effective way to manage the breaking point is through controlled release. This involves seeking out professional environments, such as therapy or men's support groups, where the emotional weight can be offloaded in a safe, structured way. Potential outcomes of ignoring the need for controlled release include impulsive decision-making that can negatively impact your legal standing and your relationship with your children. The psychological pivot also requires a deep dive into the fatherhood identity. In 2026, the role of the father is being redefined by a shift toward more equitable parenting time. However, Many men struggle with the psychological shift from being a full-time resident father to a part-time custodial father. Independent cinema explores this through the lens of the visitation weekend, showing the awkwardness and the performative nature of these interactions. To pivot successfully, you must move beyond the performance. Step by step, this means creating a home for your children that is not a vacation spot, but a secondary foundation. It means having a toothbrush for them, their own clothes, and their own chores. You are not a guest in their lives, and they are not guests in yours. When you anchor your identity in the reality of your children's needs, the silence of the apartment becomes less of a threat and more of a preparation period. But there is a specific type of psychological warfare that independent film often overlooks, and that is the digital shadow. In 2026, your divorce is not just happening in your living room. It is happening on your phone. Every time you check an ex-spouse's social media or look at old photos, you are engaging in psychological self-harm. Historical trends show that digital stalking is a primary driver of post-divorce anxiety in men. The pivot requires a total digital sanitization. This isn't about being petty. It is about protecting your cognitive bandwidth. You cannot rebuild your fortress while you are constantly looking back at the ruins of the old one. The psychological battle is won in the moments when you choose the future over the past. It is won when you realize that the silence is not an enemy, but a blank canvas. But as you begin to fill that canvas, you will face a new challenge. The world will see you differently. Your friends, your family, and your colleagues will all have their own cinematic version of who you are now. Some will see you as a tragedy, others will see you as a cautionary tale. In the next part, we are going to explore the social rebranding. We will look at how to navigate the shifting tectonic plates of your social circle, and why the way you tell your story in 2026 will dictate your status for the next decade. The pivot is internal, but the rebranding is global. It is time to step back into the light, but you need to know which version of yourself to bring with you. The moment you step out of your apartment and back into the social currents of your city, you are no longer just a man. You are a narrative. In American independent film, this is often the second act turning point where the protagonist has to face his peers, his parents, and his professional network. The camera usually lingers on the character's face as he enters a crowded room, capturing the precise second he realizes that everyone already knows. In 2026, this isn't just a cinematic metaphor, it is a digital reality. Your social circle has already processed the data of your separation through the filtered lens of social media and mutual acquaintances. This is where social rebranding begins. It is the process of reclaiming your identity from the rumors and the pity. If you do not proactively manage this rebranding, the potential outcomes include social marginalization and a permanent label as the tragic figure of your social group. Imagine if you are Robert, a 40-year-old marketing director in Chicago in 2026. You are attending your first industry mixer since the divorce became public. You walk in and you see the head tilt. You know the one, the sympathetic, slightly condescending angle people use when they don't know what to say but want to show they pity you. In independent cinema, characters like Miles in Sideways or the ensemble in Kicking and Screaming represent historical trends where men become defined by their stagnation. They become the guy who is still talking about his ex-wife 5 years later at a dive bar. For Robert, the goal is to break that cinematic trope immediately. Step by step, the rebranding starts with the narrative script. When someone asks how you are doing, you do not provide a forensic analysis of the legal proceedings. You provide a vision of the future. You say, I am focused on my new project in the West Loop and spending quality time with the kids. This shifts the focus from what you lost to what you are building. Historical trends in male social behavior suggest that men are significantly more likely than women to lose their entire social infrastructure after a divorce. Often, the social life was curated by the spouse. When the marriage ends, the man realizes he doesn't have his own friends. He has couple friends who have a loyalty to the status quo. Data from 2026 indicates that nearly 60% of shared friends will eventually drift toward the spouse who remains in the primary social hub, or the family home. To survive this, you must conduct a social audit. This is a cold, calculated assessment of your network. Step 1. Identify the loyalists, the people who knew you before the marriage and who value you as an individual. Step 2. Identify the neutral parties, those who want to stay out of the drama, but are open to a new, independent relationship with you. Step 3. Identify the double agents, those who are feeding information back to your ex-spouse or who thrive on the gossip of your collapse. You must prune the double agents with the same clinical precision an editor uses to cut a scene that doesn't serve the plot. Independent film frequently explores the tension of the family dinner. Think of the masterpiece The Meyerowitz Stories. We see how long-standing family dynamics and the expectations of parents can trap a man in a version of himself that no longer exists. For Robert in Chicago, his parents in the suburbs might still be mourning the loss of their daughter-in-law, inadvertently making Robert feel like a failure every Sunday. The social rebrand requires a firm boundary protocol with your family. You must explicitly instruct them on what you are and are not willing to discuss. Historical trends show that men who allow their parents or siblings to dwell on the negativity of the divorce have a 40% slower emotional recovery rate. In 2026, this also means managing the family group chat. If the digital noise is pulling you back into the tragedy, you must mute the channel. This isn't about being rude. It is about protecting your cognitive bandwidth so you can function as a professional and a father. Furthermore, let us look at the professional pivot. In the corporate world of 2026, your personal life is often a subtext to your professional performance. Independent cinema often shows the divorced man's career spiraling out of control, losing the big account, showing up disheveled, or snapping at a colleague. Case studies of high-level executives show that the potential outcomes of a messy public divorce include being passed over for promotions because of perceived instability. The rebrand requires you to overperform in the professional sphere. You use the extra time you now have, the time that used to be spent on domestic compromise, and you channel it into a specific high-visibility project. You want the narrative at the office to be, Robert is more focused than ever. You become the protagonist of a different genre. A success story rather than a domestic drama. We must also address the digital footprint of 2026. Your social media is the trailer for your new life. If your Instagram is still filled with photos of your wedding and family vacations from 2023, you are sending a message of stagnation. The step-by-step detail here is the digital scrub. You do not delete your past that looks like an emotional outburst, but you archive it. You move it out of the public eye. Your new digital presence should reflect the minimalism and clarity we discussed in Part 4. It should show you engaging in new hobbies, traveling to new locations, and building a life that is vibrant and independent. Historical trends suggest that men who curate a positive, forward-looking digital presence report higher levels of self-esteem and more success in the new social landscape. But the most difficult part of the rebrand isn't the public. It is the mirror. Independent film directors love the shot of a man staring at himself in a mirror, looking for the person he used to be. The 2026 man needs to realize that the person he used to be is a character in a film that has already finished its theatrical run. You are now in the sequel. This involves a physical transformation that goes beyond just a haircut. We see this in films where the character starts to take care of himself as a way of reclaiming his agency. In 2026, this involves a deep dive into the bioarchitecture of the male body. You cannot sustain a high-level social rebrand and a demanding professional pivot if your physical engine is running on fumes. Historical trends show that the stress of divorce adds 10 years to a man's biological age if left unmanaged. You might have the script down, you might have pruned the double agents, and you might have the 2026 professional focus, but if your cortisol levels are redlining and your sleep is non-existent, the mask will eventually slip. You will find yourself back in that indie film cliché, staring at a frozen dinner in a dark kitchen. To prevent this, we have to look at the one thing the legal system can't take and your ex-spouse can't influence: your physical vessel. In the next part, we are going to explore the physical reconstruction. We will look at the cinematic transition from the dad bod of the domestic years to the optimized, resilient version of the 2026 man. We will analyze the data on testosterone, stress management, and the specific 2026 health protocols that act as a shield against the psychological erosion of the divorce process. You have the narrative, now you need the armor. The social world is watching, and it is time to give them something impressive to look at. The transformation starts at the cellular level. The cellular level is where the biological tax of divorce is first collected, long before it shows up in your bank account or a courtroom transcript. In American independent film, we often see this through the visual shorthand of physical deterioration. The camera lingers on a protagonist who has forgotten to eat, or who has replaced meals with substances and caffeine. Think of the case study presented in the 2017 film You Were Never Really Here, where the physical scars on Joaquin Phoenix's body tell a story of accumulated trauma and neglect. While that film is a heightened thriller, it captures a historical trend in masculine crisis: the body as a site of the struggle. When you are under the chronic stress of a 2026 divorce, your body is not just a passive observer. It is a chemical factory producing high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. If this production is left unmanaged, the potential outcomes include systemic inflammation, cognitive fog, and a weakened immune system, precisely at the moment when you need your mental faculties to be sharpest. Imagine if you are Michael, a 52-year-old civil engineer in Miami in 2026. You are currently 6 months into a high-conflict litigation. In your previous life, you were a weekend warrior, hitting the gym 3 times a week and maintaining a respectable level of fitness. But since the separation, you have stopped. You are sleeping 4 hours a night, your diet consists of takeout eaten over a laptop, and you have gained 15 pounds of visceral fat around your midsection. This is the dad bod of despair, a common trope in independent cinema that reflects a very real biological reality. In the year 2026, we have access to more data than ever before regarding the impact of situational stress on male endocrine health. Historical trends indicate that men in Michael's position often experience a significant drop in total and free testosterone. This isn't just about muscle mass. Testosterone is a primary driver of confidence, decisive action, and emotional resilience. When your levels bottom out, you become the passive, reactive character we see in the first act of every indie tragedy. Step by step, the physical reconstruction begins with the regulation of the circadian engine. Independent films love the aesthetic of the neon-lit late night, but for Michael in Miami, the late night is a trap. In 2026, wearable technology has provided us with case studies showing that sleep deprivation during divorce proceedings correlates with a 30% increase in impulsive, high-risk financial and legal decisions. If you are sleep deprived, you are more likely to send that angry email or agree to a settlement just to make the pain stop. The first detail in your armor is a strict sleep hygiene protocol. This means using blackout curtains, maintaining a cool room temperature, and utilizing 2026 blue light filtering technology on all devices after 8 p.m. You are not just resting. You are recharging the cognitive battery that will allow you to navigate the next day's mediation with clinical precision. The second detail in your physical armor is the nutritional reset. In independent cinema, the divorced man's refrigerator is a wasteland of expired condiments and half-eaten pizza. We see this in the 2010 film Cyrus, where the protagonist's lack of domestic order is reflected in his physical sluggishness. For the 2026 man, your diet is your fuel for the reconstruction. Historical trends show that a diet high in processed sugars and trans fats exacerbates the anxiety already present in the divorce process. You must pivot to a high-protein, micronutrient-dense architecture. This involves a step-by-step removal of inflammatory triggers. In 2026, personalized nutrition based on inflammatory markers is a standard educational tool. By reducing systemic inflammation, you clear the cognitive fog, allowing you to process legal documents and complex financial data without the mental fatigue that plagues most men in this situation. Now, let us examine the role of physical resistance. In the 2008 film The Wrestler, we see a man whose entire identity is tied to his physical performance, yet he is falling apart. The lesson for the modern man is that your exercise shouldn't be another source of stress. It should be a source of agency. When Michael in Miami goes back to the gym, he isn't just lifting weights. He is engaging in a ritual of self-ownership. Case studies in sports psychology suggest that resistance training increases the expression of androgen receptors, making you more sensitive to the testosterone your body is producing. This has a direct carryover to your social rebranding. A man who carries himself with the posture of someone who trains is perceived differently by judges, opposing counsel, and his own children. It signals that he has not been broken by the process. It signals that he is an active participant in his own life, not a victim of the narrative. Furthermore, we must address the 2026 bioarchitecture of stress management. In independent films, the character often deals with stress through a dramatic breakdown or a long, silent drive. While cinematic, these are not effective long-term strategies. In 2026, we look at historical trends in heart rate variability, or HRV. HRV is a measure of the variation in time between each heartbeat and is a key indicator of your nervous system's resilience. Men with high HRV are better able to stay calm under pressure, like when they are being cross-examined or dealing with a difficult co-parenting exchange. Step by step, you can improve your HRV through breathwork and cold exposure therapy, practices that have moved from the fringe of independent cinema into the mainstream of male performance in 2026. Imagine Michael starting his morning with a 3-minute cold plunge. The physiological shock forces his brain to focus on the present moment, stripping away the anxieties of the past and future. It is a cinematic moment of clarity that serves a functional purpose. The visual transformation is also a psychological shield. Independent cinema often uses the makeover montage as a sign of a character's return to the world. In the reality of 2026, this is about the aesthetic of competence. When you look at the case studies of men who successfully navigated the social rebranding we discussed in Part 5, they almost all underwent a physical refinement. This isn't about vanity. It is about the historical trend of the halo effect, where people perceive physically fit individuals as more disciplined, intelligent, and capable. In a divorce where your character is often being called into question, your physical vessel acts as a silent witness in your favor. It says, "I am disciplined enough to care for myself, therefore I am disciplined enough to care for my children and my responsibilities." But there is a final deeper layer to this physical armor. In many independent films, the body is a vessel for grief. We see this in the way a character's gait changes or the way they hold their shoulders. To truly reconstruct yourself, you must address the somatization of the divorce, the way your body holds onto the tension of the conflict. This involves a step-by-step practice of mindfulness that is grounded in the physical. It is the realization that your body is the only thing you truly own in this process. The house can be sold, the money can be divided, and the time with children can be regulated, but your physical health is your primary asset. As Michael in Miami begins to see the lines of his jaw again, as his sleep stabilizes and his energy returns, he realizes that he is no longer the tragic lead in a film about loss. He is the protagonist of a film about a comeback. But even with a reconstructed body and a social rebrand, there is a dangerous territory that every divorced man eventually enters. It is the land of the rebound, the first attempt to find a new co-star for the next chapter. In American independent film, this is often where the most cringeworthy and destructive mistakes are made. What happens when you take your new armor and your new narrative and try to plug them into a new relationship too soon? Why does the 2026 dating landscape feel like a psychological minefield for the newly single man? In the next part, we are going to explore the rebound trap. We will analyze the cinematic case studies of the man-child and the serial monogamist, and why your first post-divorce relationship is statistically likely to be a disaster unless you follow a very specific set of rules. The armor is on, but you need to know who you are fighting for. It is time to talk about the ghost of the next girlfriend. The ghost of the next girlfriend is a spectral presence that haunts the midpoint of every American independent film about divorce. It is the character who appears just as the protagonist has finished painting his new apartment or started a new exercise routine. In the cinematic world, she is often presented as the manic pixie dream girl, or the wise soul who will heal the hero's wounds with a single meaningful conversation in a dimly lit bar. But in the reality of 2026, this character is less of a savior and more of a mirror, reflecting back the fragmented pieces of a man who hasn't yet finished his own reconstruction. Historical trends indicate that the first relationship following a major marital dissolution has an extraordinarily high failure rate, often collapsing under the weight of unresolved trauma and emotional projection. This is the rebound trap, and for a man in 2026, falling into it can undo months of progress on his financial fortress and psychological pivot. Imagine if you are James, a 39-year-old architect in Phoenix, Arizona, in this year of 2026. You have followed the protocols. You have cleaned up your digital footprint, you have stabilized your health, and you have a functional visitation schedule. But the silence we discussed in Part 4 is starting to feel less like a canvas and more like a void. You download a dating app and within 48 hours you are sitting across from Sarah. She is smart, she is kind, and she listens. Suddenly, the last 18 months of pain feel like they have been erased. This is the case study of the serial monogamist, a common archetype in independent films like Sideways. Think of the character Miles. He is so consumed by the loss of his ex-wife that he treats every new interaction as either a chance for redemption or a source of profound disappointment. He isn't seeing the woman in front of him. He is seeing a role that needs to be filled in the script of his life. The potential outcomes for James in 2026 are predictable based on historical trends. Because he hasn't achieved emotional sobriety, he will likely overdisclose his past. He will turn the first 3 dates into a trauma dumping session, effectively treating Sarah as an unpaid therapist. In independent cinema, this is often portrayed as a bonding moment, but in 2026 social dynamics, it is a significant red flag that signals instability. Step by step, the re-entry into the dating world requires a strict communication boundary protocol. The first rule of this protocol is the 60-minute rule. During the first 3 dates, you are prohibited from discussing your divorce for more than 60 seconds. If the topic arises, you use the social rebrand script we developed in Part 5. I am in a transitional phase and focused on the future, but I would rather hear about your experience in the tech sector. This keeps the focus on the present and prevents you from slipping back into the role of the tragic protagonist. Now let us examine the case study of the man-child, a trope popularized in films like Swingers. This is the man who enters the 2026 dating scene with a desperate need for external validation. He is looking for a woman to tell him he is still attractive, still relevant, and still a good man. In the film, Mike spends his time staring at the phone, waiting for a call that will never come, paralyzed by his own insecurity. For a man in Phoenix in 2026, this manifests as an obsession with app metrics and digital likes. Historical trends show that men who rely on dating apps for self-esteem during a divorce experience a 20% higher rate of depressive relapses. The dating app is a tool, not a therapist. If you are using it to fill a hole in your soul, you are effectively trying to build a house on a swamp. The 2026 dating landscape has been further complicated by the rise of AI-driven personality matching and hyper-filtered profiles. It is a world where everyone is presenting a curated, cinematic version of themselves. If you are James, and you are still in a vulnerable psychological state, you are susceptible to the idealization phase. You see a profile and you invent a personality for the woman that fits exactly what you think you are missing. Independent cinema often uses a soft-focus lens during these scenes to show the character's delusion. To counter this, you must apply the forensic dating method. This involves a step-by-step deconstruction of your own attractions. Are you attracted to this person because of who they are, or because they are the polar opposite of your ex-spouse? Historical trends suggest that men often counter-swing, seeking out partners who possess the exact traits their former spouse lacked, only to find that these new traits come with their own set of incompatible challenges. Furthermore, we must address the financial vulnerability of the rebound. In Part 3, we built your financial fortress. A rebound relationship is often the first major breach in that fortress. In 2026, the experience economy is at an all-time high. To impress a new partner, James might find himself spending thousands on weekend getaways, high-end dinners, and gifts, attempting to buy the feeling of a new life. Case studies of post-divorce finances show that men often spend more in the first 6 months of a new relationship than they did in the last 3 years of their marriage. This is a compensatory behavior designed to mask the feeling of being broken. The step-by-step detail for financial protection in dating is the budgetary anchor. You must set a monthly socialization cap that does not exceed 10% of your discretionary income. If you find yourself dipping into your legal fees or your children's college fund to pay for a date, you are no longer dating. You are self-medicating. There is also the introduction trap. In independent cinema, there is often a poignant scene where the new girlfriend meets the children. The music is light, the kids are smiling, and the new family unit is formed. In 2026, this is one of the most high-risk maneuvers a man can make. Historical trends in family psychology indicate that introducing a new partner to children within the first year of a separation significantly increases the children's anxiety and can create a permanent rift in the father-child bond. The potential outcomes of a premature introduction include the child feeling that their mother is being replaced, leading to behavioral issues and parental alienation. The rule for the 2026 man is the 1-year minimum. You do not introduce a partner to your children until the relationship has been stable for 12 months. This isn't about hiding your life. It is about protecting your children's emotional equilibrium while you are still stabilizing your own. Independent film directors often use the broken hero trope to make a character more sympathetic. But in the 2026 dating market, being broken is not a romantic asset. It is a liability. The most successful men are those who enter the scene as complete individuals. This means you have hobbies that don't involve your children or your ex. It means you have a social circle that is independent. It means you are the director of your own film, and you are looking for a co-star, not a lead actress to carry the plot for you. Case studies of resilient men show that they often take a dating sabbatical, a period of 6 to 12 months where they intentionally remain single to ensure their psychological pivot has fully taken hold. As James in Phoenix begins to navigate this world, he realizes that the ghost of the next girlfriend is only dangerous if he gives her the power to define him. If he stays true to the physical and psychological armor we have built, the dating process becomes an exploration rather than a rescue mission. But as he finds his footing in this new social reality, a more complex challenge emerges from the shadows of his past. It is the one thing no amount of dating or exercise can resolve. It is the ongoing, often lifelong interaction with the person who knows his every weakness. How do you maintain your 2026 armor when you have to face the person who helped you forge it, and then helped you break it? How do you transition from spouse to business partner without losing your mind? In the next part, we are going to explore the co-parenting Cold War. We will look at the cinematic depictions of the Civil War at home and why the parallel parenting model is the only way to survive a high-conflict ex in 2026. The dating apps can wait. Your children's future depends on how you handle the next conversation with their mother. It is time to learn the rules of the new diplomacy. The rules of the new diplomacy are predicated on a single uncomfortable truth. The romantic bond is dead, but the biological and legal merger remains active. In American independent film, we often see the failure of this transition during the handoff scene. That agonizing 60 seconds on a suburban driveway where the camera stays wide to capture the distance between two people who used to share a bed. In the 2005 case study of The Squid and the Whale, the character Bernard fails this diplomacy because he continues to treat his ex-wife as a competitor for intellectual and emotional dominance. He triangulates his children, using them as couriers for his resentment. For the man in 2026, this cinematic failure is a warning. If you treat your ex-spouse as an adversary you must defeat, you have already lost the most valuable asset in the merger: your children's psychological stability. Imagine if you are Alex, a 44-year-old logistics manager in Atlanta, Georgia. In this year of 2026, you are 3 months into a shared custody arrangement. Every time you see your ex-spouse, the conversation starts with the kids' schedule, but inevitably veers into a postmortem of why the marriage failed. This is the cinematic feedback loop. You are stuck in a scene that has already been shot and edited. To break this loop, you must adopt the business partner mindset. In a corporate merger, if a former partner is difficult, you do not engage in emotional warfare. You stick to the contract. You treat every interaction as if it were a recorded professional meeting. Historical trends in family law suggest that men who shift to this clinical, professional tone experience a 50% reduction in high-conflict incidents within the first 6 months. The first step-by-step detail of the new diplomacy is the implementation of parallel parenting. In American independent film, co-parenting is often portrayed as a collaborative, almost friendship-like state, as seen in the later acts of Boyhood. While this is an ideal historical trend for some, it is often a dangerous trap for men in high-conflict divorces in 2026. Co-parenting requires a high level of mutual trust and frequent communication. If that trust is absent, attempting to co-parent leads to constant friction. Parallel parenting, however, is the educational model where each parent has total autonomy during their own time, with minimal contact between the two. You are not two people running one household. You are two separate CEOs running two distinct branch offices of the same corporation. For Alex in Atlanta, the step-by-step transition to parallel parenting involves the digital demilitarized zone. In 2026, the standard protocol for men in this situation is the use of specialized co-parenting applications. These platforms serve as a centralized, unmodifiable record of all communication, calendars, and expenses. Case studies show that moving all dialogue from personal text messages to a court-monitored app immediately de-escalates the tension. The logic is simple. People are less likely to be incendiary when they know a third party, a judge or a mediator, might review the transcript. Historical trends indicate that the potential outcomes of this digital boundary include better sleep for the father and a more predictable schedule for the children, who are no longer exposed to the atmospheric tension of their parents' smartphone pings. Let us analyze the geometry of the handoff. In independent cinema, the handoff is usually a site of conflict. In Marriage Story, we see the stress of the physical transition. The bags being moved, the awkward silence, the lingering gaze of the lawyers. To master the diplomacy of 2026, you must remove the audience. If the conflict is high, the educational recommendation is the neutral handoff. This involves using a school, a structured after-school activity, or a public location as the transition point. By eliminating the driveway confrontation, you eliminate the stage upon which the old drama is performed. Alex in Atlanta starts dropping his kids off at soccer practice on Friday, and his ex-spouse picks them up. They never have to see each other. This is not a failure of communication. It is a strategic success in conflict avoidance. Potential outcomes of this method include a significant drop in the children's cortisol levels, as they are no longer required to navigate the emotional minefield between their parents' car doors. Furthermore, we must address the gray rock method within the context of the 2026 diplomacy. This is a psychological technique where a person becomes as uninteresting and unremittingly neutral as a gray rock. When your ex-spouse attempts to bait you into an emotional response, perhaps by criticizing your new apartment or your parenting style, you do not defend yourself. In an independent film, the hero might deliver a stinging monologue that wins the scene. In real life, that monologue costs you $5,000 in legal fees and 3 weeks of peace. The step-by-step detail here is the neutral response. You use phrases like, "I hear your concern," or "I will take that into consideration." You provide no emotional fuel. Historical trends suggest that when one party refuses to engage in the drama, the other party eventually loses interest in the conflict. You are effectively canceling the show by refusing to play your part. We also have to consider the intellectual property of fatherhood. In The Squid and the Whale, the father tries to mold his sons into mini versions of himself to spite the mother. This is a case study in how not to handle your new diplomacy. In 2026, with the sheer volume of information children are exposed to, your influence is not based on control but on consistency. You must build a distinct culture in your home that is not defined by its opposition to the other parent's home. If their mother's house is strict and academic, your house doesn't have to be the chaotic fun zone. It should be the place of stability and individual growth. Step by step, you define your own house rules, your own traditions, and your own values. You never mention the other household's rules as a point of comparison. You simply state, "In this house we do things this way." This creates a psychological safe haven for the child, allowing them to decompress from the Cold War. Data from 2026 also highlights the importance of the social buffer. Men often make the mistake of using their children as emotional confidants, a historical trend known as parentification. Independent cinema explores this in films like The Florida Project or Suncoast, where the lines between parent and child become dangerously blurred. The diplomatic protocol for 2026 requires you to have a separate adult support network, the tribe we discussed in Part 4. Your children are your stakeholders, not your board of directors. They should not know about the legal bills, the dating struggles, or the frustrations of the co-parenting relationship. The potential outcomes of keeping these worlds separate include a much higher degree of long-term emotional intelligence in the children. As Alex in Atlanta masters the gray rock method and the neutral handoff, he notices something. The silence he once feared is now his greatest ally. He is no longer reacting, he is operating. The Cold War hasn't necessarily ended, but he has built a missile defense system that makes him untouchable. However, as the external conflict settles, a new, more subtle threat begins to emerge. It is the internal realization that the battle he has been fighting wasn't just with his ex-spouse or the legal system. It was with the very concept of his own future. What happens when the court cases are over, the children are asleep, and you realize you have won your freedom, but you have no idea what to do with it? How do you transition from a man who is surviving a divorce to a man who is building a legacy? In the next part, we are going to explore the legacy blueprint. We will look at the cinematic depictions of the third act, the moment the protagonist stops running away from his past and starts walking toward a purpose. We will analyze the data on male fulfillment post-divorce and why the 2026 man needs to think beyond the next weekend. The Cold War is over. It is time to build a new world. The silence of victory is often louder and more unsettling than the noise of the battle itself. In the third act of American independent film, there is a recurring visual trope. The protagonist sitting in a quiet, sun-drenched room, looking out a window at a world that no longer requires his defense. He is no longer defined by his ex-spouse's anger, his lawyer's aggressive emails, or the frantic scheduling of the co-parenting Cold War. He is a blank slate. But as any screenwriter will tell you, a blank slate is a terrifying place to be because it demands a new narrative. This is the moment for the legacy blueprint. It is the transition from a man who is merely surviving a divorce to a man who is intentionally building a world that will outlast him. Historical trends in male psychology show that men who fail to move past the survival phase often enter a period of existential stagnation, where the freedom they fought for becomes a prison of aimlessness. In 2026, the challenge for the modern man is to use this newfound autonomy to construct a life of eudaimonic fulfillment, meaning derived from purpose, rather than falling back into the hedonistic traps of the early recovery stages. Imagine if you are Christopher, a 50-year-old director of operations in Nashville, Tennessee, In this year of 2026, the legal dust has settled, your financial fortress is secure, your physical armor is reconstructed, and you have mastered the diplomacy of parallel parenting. You are sitting in your Nashville home, and for the first time in 20 years, no one is telling you who to be. Your first instinct might be to fill the space with noise, more work, more dating, more consumption. But we must look at the case study of the 2010 film Beginners. In this film, the protagonist's father, played by Christopher Plummer, comes out of the closet and completely reinvents his life at the age of 75 after his wife passes away. It is a masterclass in the potential outcomes of a late-stage identity shift. The film teaches us that the narrative doesn't end when the primary relationship does. It simply enters a more authentic chapter. For Christopher in Nashville, the legacy blueprint is about identifying the core values that were suppressed during the years of marital compromise and making them the foundation of his new world. Step by step, the construction of the legacy blueprint begins with the core value audit. In independent cinema, we often see this through a character's return to an old passion, painting, music, or a forgotten trade. In 2026, this isn't just a romantic gesture. It is a strategic requirement for long-term mental health. Data suggests that men who engage in high-skill, low-ego hobbies report a 40% increase in overall life satisfaction post-divorce. Christopher decides to return to his roots in woodworking, not just as a hobby, but as a way to create tangible heirlooms for his children. This is a functional pivot. He is moving from being a consumer to being a creator. Historical trends show that men who build things, whether businesses, art, or community projects, experience a much higher degree of resilience against the isolation that often follows a divorce. The second step in the legacy blueprint is the career reinvention. In the corporate landscape of 2026, the concept of the linear career path is dying. Many men find that the job they held during their marriage was a choice made for stability rather than passion. Case studies of men in their late 40s and 50s show a historical trend toward what is known as the encore career. This is a shift toward work that combines personal meaning with social impact. Christopher in Nashville realizes that while he is excellent at operations, he no longer wants to optimize supply chains for a corporation that doesn't share his values. He uses his financial fortress to transition into a consultancy role for local nonprofits, helping them scale their impact. Potential outcomes of this shift include a renewed sense of professional vigor and a social network that is built on shared purpose, rather than shared professional obligation. This is how you rebrand yourself not just to the world but to yourself. Furthermore, we must address the mentorship model. One of the most powerful ways to move out of the tragedy of your own story is to become a supporting character in someone else's success story. In independent films, we often see the older, wiser character guiding a younger protagonist. Think of the relationship in the film The Way Back. For the 2026 man, mentorship is a vital part of the legacy. Historical trends indicate that men who mentor younger colleagues or community members have significantly lower rates of depression and higher levels of cognitive function as they age. Christopher begins volunteering as a mentor for a youth entrepreneurship program in Nashville. He is turning the trauma of his divorce, the resilience he had to build, and the diplomacy he had to learn into wisdom that he can pass down. He is no longer just a man who lost a marriage. He is a man who gained a perspective that is valuable to the next generation. We also have to consider the 2026 digital legacy. In Part 5, we talked about the digital scrub, but the legacy blueprint is about digital construction. In a world where your children and grandchildren will one day search for your name, what will they find? Will they find the wreckage of a high-conflict divorce? Or will they find a record of a man who stood for something? Christopher starts a digital journal and a video archive for his children. He doesn't talk about the divorce. He talks about his philosophy on life, the mistakes he made, the books that changed him, and the family history he wants to preserve. He is using 2026 technology to bridge the gap between the generations. This is a step-by-step detail in ensuring that your narrative is the one that survives. Potential outcomes of this digital legacy include a stronger bond with adult children who can eventually view their father as a complex, principled individual, rather than just a participant in a domestic conflict. The legacy blueprint also requires a physical asset realignment. In the early stages of divorce, we fight for the house because it represents safety. But in the legacy phase, the house is just a tool. Christopher in Nashville decides to sell the large family home that felt like a museum of his past and buys a smaller property with a large workshop and a guest suite for when his kids visit. This is a move toward intentional living. He is aligning his physical world with his new core values. Historical trends show that men who downsize and simplify their physical environment after a divorce report feeling a profound sense of lightness and agency. They are no longer maintaining a lifestyle for a ghost family. They are building a sanctuary for their future self. Independent film directors often use the final shots of a movie to show the character moving toward the horizon. In your life, the horizon is the long-term impact of your choices today. The legacy blueprint isn't about being perfect. It is about being intentional. It is about realizing that while you cannot control the first act of your life, you are the sole director of the final act. Christopher in Nashville is no longer the man who got divorced. He is the woodworker, the mentor, the consultant, and the father who built a new world from the ruins of the old one. He has moved from the survival of Part 1 to the legacy of Part 9. But as he looks toward this new horizon, there is one final piece of the puzzle that needs to be placed. It is the most difficult thing for any man to do, especially after he has fought so hard for his freedom and his fortress. It is the act of final integration. How do you take all these disparate parts, the legal battle, the psychological pivot, the financial fortress, the physical armor, and the legacy blueprint, and turn them into a single cohesive identity that can withstand the test of time? How do you finally forgive the man you were in Part 1 so you can fully inhabit the man you have become? In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to explore the grand integration. We will look at the cinematic finale and the data on the long-term peace of mind that comes from the ultimate act of closure. The world is built. Now it is time to live in it. The final curtain is about to rise, and you need to be ready for the applause. The final act of the cinematic journey is not the resolution of the conflict, but the integration of the struggle into a new, more complex identity. In American independent film, the finale often avoids the neat, tidy bow of a Hollywood blockbuster. Instead, we are left with a shot of the protagonist engaging in a mundane task, washing dishes, walking through a park, or sitting in a quiet cafe, where his expression reveals a profound, settled peace. This is the grand integration. It is the moment where the man who was shattered in Part 1 and reconstructed in the subsequent chapters finally stops seeing himself as a victim of a divorce and begins seeing himself as the author of his own existence. For the man in 2026, this integration is the difference between a life of suppressed resentment and a life of authentic power. Historical trends indicate that men who reach this stage of emotional and situational synthesis report the highest levels of life satisfaction in the 5-year post-divorce horizon. Imagine if you are Brandon, a 45-year-old executive in Seattle, Washington, in this year of 2026. It has been exactly 18 months since your decree was finalized. You are standing in your kitchen, preparing a meal for your children who will be arriving for their scheduled weekend in 2 hours. There is no panic. There is no frantic checking of the co-parenting app to see if a conflict is brewing. There is no lingering bitterness as you look at the empty space where a shared life once existed. You have successfully merged the pillars we have built throughout this masterclass: the financial fortress, the physical armor, the psychological pivot, and the legacy blueprint. You are no longer performing a role. You are inhabiting a reality. This is the case study of the integrated man, a figure often glimpsed in the closing frames of films like Everything Everywhere All at Once, where the protagonist realizes that among all the possible versions of their life, the one they are in is the only one that matters. Step by step, the grand integration begins with the forgiveness protocol. This is perhaps the most misunderstood element of the entire process. In independent cinema, forgiveness is rarely a dramatic speech. It is a quiet internal release. Historical trends in psychological recovery suggest that the potential outcomes of holding on to anger include chronic elevated blood pressure and a persistent stress shadow that affects all future relationships. For Brandon in 2026, the forgiveness protocol does not mean condoning the actions of his ex-spouse or forgetting the legal battles of the previous year. It means a clinical, step-by-step detachment from the emotional charge of those events. You look at the 2024 version of yourself, the man who was panicked, broke, and desperate, and you offer him compassion. You recognize that he did the best he could with the information he had. By forgiving your past self, you effectively cut the tether to the tragedy. The second detail of the integration is the synthesis of assets. By 2026, Brandon's financial fortress is no longer a defensive structure. It is an engine for his new life. He has moved past the fear of scarcity that we discussed in Part 3. He no longer views his child support or alimony payments as a loss, but as a settled line item in a successful business. He has automated his investments, secured his digital legacy, and aligned his spending with the core values he identified in Part 9. Data shows that men who reach this level of financial synthesis experience a 60% reduction in anxiety related to their former marriage. The money is no longer a weapon, it is a tool. Brandon isn't just surviving. He is utilizing his resources to build a 2026 lifestyle that reflects his true priorities, whether that is travel, philanthropy, or investing in his children's long-term ventures. Now, let us examine the social synthesis. In Part 5, we talked about rebranding, which can sometimes feel like a performance. In the final integration, the performance becomes organic. Brandon no longer has to try to look focused or act like he is doing well. The new social circle he built, the tribe of loyalists and neutral parties, has become his primary community. Historical trends indicate that as a man moves further from the divorce date, his social identity shifts from the divorce guy to the guy who is an expert in his field, a dedicated father, and a reliable friend. The potential outcomes of this shift are profound. In the 2026 social landscape, authenticity is the highest currency. When Brandon enters a room now, people don't see a narrative of loss. They see a man of substance who has navigated a storm and come out stronger. This is the cinematic payoff where the character finally stops looking over his shoulder. Furthermore, we must address the biological integration. In Part 6, we built the armor. Now, that armor has become Brandon's natural state. His 2026 health protocols, the sleep hygiene, the resistance training, the inflammatory management, are no longer tasks on a checklist. They are his baseline. Case studies in longevity show that men who maintain these habits beyond the initial crisis phase add significant years to their health span. Brandon's physical vessel is now a reflection of his internal discipline. He carries himself with a quiet confidence that is not based on ego, but on the proven ability to overcome adversity. In independent film, this is often shown through a character's increased presence in the frame. He takes up space. He is grounded. He is no longer the flickering, anxious shadow he was in the first act. The most critical element of the grand integration is the fatherhood culmination. In 2026, the relationship Brandon has with his children has evolved beyond the visitation model. Because he followed the diplomacy of the co-parenting Cold War in Part 8, his children now view his home as a place of absolute stability. They have seen their father handle the most difficult period of his life with dignity and strength. This provides them with a psychological blueprint for their own future challenges. Educational data suggests that the potential outcomes for children of integrated fathers include higher academic performance and better emotional regulation. Brandon has moved from being a weekend dad to being a foundational mentor. He has used the legacy blueprint to ensure that his influence is based on his character, not his proximity. As we reach the conclusion of this deep dive masterclass, we must look at the final case study of the independent film finale. Think of the 2011 film Beginners. The ending isn't about finding a new perfect partner. It is about the protagonist's willingness to stay in the room, to stay present, and to continue the work of living. For Brandon in Seattle, the finale is a quiet Saturday afternoon. The kids are playing in the other room. He is looking at his woodworking project, a table he is building for his new home. He realizes that the divorce wasn't the end of his story. It was the inciting incident that forced him to become the man he was always supposed to be. He has achieved the ultimate goal of the 2026 man. He has turned a high-risk life event into a high-value character transformation. The series of 10 parts you have just completed is more than a guide. It is a cinematic map of the male soul in the modern era. You have seen the traps, you have built the fortress, and you have forged the armor. You have analyzed the data and studied the historical trends. But knowledge without action is just a film you've watched but never lived. The grand integration is a daily practice. It is the choice to choose the future over the past every single morning. The machine is built. The world is yours to direct. But even as the credits begin to roll on this chapter, a new screen is lighting up in the distance. The transformation you have undergone has prepared you for something even larger. Now that you have mastered the internal world and the domestic battlefield, what happens when you turn that same level of clinical precision and strategic depth toward the external world of high-stakes wealth and global influence? What happens when the man who could not be broken by divorce decides to build an empire? The journey of the integrated man is just the beginning. In our next masterclass series, we shift from survival to dominance. We are going to explore the architecture of the Second Empire, how to take your 2026 armor and use it to conquer the markets, the industries, and the new frontiers of the next decade. The credits are over. The post-credit scene has begun. We will see you in the next series.